Today, my guest is Marcela. She is Beyond The Bruise on Instagram and TikTok, and she's also a domestic violence survivor. And in today's discussion, we went over some of the rationalizations people make about the abusive person's behavior, how a healthy relationship feels versus an abusive relationship, and a very important question to ask yourself if you're with someone that is abusive. And we also went over a whole lot more. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did. Marcela, how are you today, miss?
I'm doing great, Jared. So glad we can connect.
Me too. And you've been blowing up on social media recently, Instagram, TikTok. How on earth did you get here to where you are now?
All right. Well, when a mom and a dad love each other, they that's like my joke. That's my go-to joke. People are like, how did you get here? Well, but surprisingly, I only started this platform maybe like 7 months ago. And I had been in a very bad relationship, as you guys know from my videos that I put out. And that lasted about 5 years. And after that, I spent a little time going through therapy, learning what was going on with me, really like digging into the why behind it, which I felt I needed to validate my experience. And then I got into another relationship. And after that ended, I kind of felt like I had this freedom and a lot of knowledge about where or how I got to where I am right now, how I got to this space that I feel a lot more confident in myself, that I feel like I'm able to wash away or explain any sort of like negative thoughts that I have. And then I just wanted to start sharing my story. Because I started noticing that a lot of people were dealing with what I had dealt with, and there really wasn't a playbook around it. I still think there isn't a playbook around it, of course, but I wanted to share how I got through it. And I think I've always loved writing and I've always loved reading. And I think not that I have a way with words, but I think I was always able um, to speak about what I was going through in a way that maybe made sense to other people. And I was like, okay, if I can start sharing my story, if I can start talking about these topics and maybe in a way that's not as blunt and not as aggressive, because I know that works for some people, but I kind of have like a big sister tone. I want people to feel heard, understood, and not shamed and not like they're doing something wrong, because of course it's okay to feel like the victim, but I think it's also important to know that there are steps that you can take to get yourself out of this too. So long-winded way of saying that I just wanted to share my story, and I think people started resonating with that. And it's a beautiful community, and I'm very grateful for it.
Well, we're glad to have you here in the community. And I think one of the things you have going for you is you have that conversational tone where it's just like you're talking to somebody over coffee or something. And it's very disarming. And I think it makes people feel comfortable. And I think that's definitely one of your assets that you have going for you.
Thank you. That's so kind. That's definitely what I wanted to do. So I appreciate you picking up on that. And I think some people really react well to being told directly and bluntly, like, hey, this is what you need to do. I am not that kind of person. So I think the videos that I make, it's like I'm almost talking to myself or like a younger version of myself, like, little girl, like everything's gonna be okay. This is why it happened, and this is what you can do to get out of it. So it's it's very much like me speaking to a younger version of myself, and what would I have wanted to hear? What would have moved the needle for me back then? What would have given me that aha moment? And I think for some people it's having that big sister best friend energy, and for other people it's being told that, what the fuck are you doing? Oh, am I allowed to swear?
Speak freely.
But yeah, I think a lot of different voices are necessary, right? Like it's not one type of person, one type of influencer or content creator that's going to own the space. I really think that it's necessary to have a lot of different people talking about subjects in different ways, because what works for me might not work for you.
Right. And my style is probably the direct opposite of your style. Like when I'm speaking, you're like the yin to my yang, I would say. But and the other thing about advice, they say all advice is really people just talking to younger versions of themselves. And I would say, yeah, that's pretty accurate.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, because I can only speak from my experience, right? So it makes sense that a lot of what I'm saying relates back to what I wish I could have told myself back in the day. So yeah, it's just amazing how many people have gone through this, you know? It's very sad, but at the same time it's empowering and it's validating to know that there's a lot of people that have been through this and they've made it to the other side. So it's, as hard as it feels when you're in the moment, there is a light at the end of the tunnel and there are people that have made it there. And the more people that start sharing their story, the quicker we can help people get to that light at the end of the tunnel.
I think a unique wrinkle in your story too is you had another relationship after your abusive relationship, and that one wasn't abusive per se. But how did that kind of color your perspective about the initial relationship?
I always say that the relationship that happened after my abusive relationship was exactly what I needed at that time. Um, that guy that I dated was very kind, very patient, very peaceful. I felt safe. I felt emotionally safe. I felt physically safe. And that was something that I did not have in my first relationship at all. It was literally like the pendulum swung the exact opposite way. Um, and it was exactly what I needed. It healed me in so many ways. And I think for me, I was so vigilant at the beginning of that relationship, trying to identify like huge glaring red flags. And I'm so thankful that he didn't prove any of my fears to be a reality. We ended up breaking up for other reasons, and I'm happy to get into that too. But I think it's really important to shed light that there can be relationships after abusive, toxic, manipulative relationships that work out or don't work out. And regardless of if they don't work out, I learned so much about myself in that relationship. I think part of what I learned too is that you cannot change people. As much as you love each other, as much as you want things to work, at the end of the day, if your natures don't match, if you don't want the same things, if you don't want them at the same time, you could try working on it. You could try going to couples therapy. You're most likely not going to be able to change the nature of that person. And why would you, right? Like if somebody needs to change to be the version of you that you want them to be, that kind of starts like resentment, right? Or it breeds some sort of resentment towards the end of the relationship. So the reason why my most previous relationship ended is because we honestly wanted different things. And I think after a couple years in the relationship, you start realizing, okay, maybe what you wanted, you don't actually want, because you have those conversations at the beginning of any relationship. Okay, do you want to have kids? What age do you want to do that? And I think we all have the best intentions, but I think sometimes when push comes to shove and when the time comes to actually put those plans into motion, some people actually aren't ready for that, and that's okay. And that's kind of why that last relationship ended for me. Is I felt like I was a little bit more ready for something and he wasn't. And I tried to change that for a while. And at the
Mm.
end of that, we both decided, hey, instead of trying to make this work and trying to make two corner pieces fit together that are never going to fit together, let's, go our ways, do end this amicably so that we can, not resent each other and not hate each other. And we still have a ton of respect for each other. Really great guy. And I know that whoever he ends up with is going to be very, very happy. But there's a level of maturity in that relationship that I gained that I did not know was possible.
Interesting. And I think it's important for people to hear what you just said because there's some people that think, never again.
Yeah.
Never again will I get into a relationship. I'm done. All guys or all women are terrible. And I think it's also important to say that that wasn't a toxic relationship. It wasn't an abusive or narcissistic relationship. It was simply not compatible. And not every breakup is because of, oh, it was just super toxic. No, not always. Not sometimes it's just not compatible. And I think that's an important thing to emphasize too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think sometimes it's even harder that way because if somebody was abusive to you, if somebody cheated on you, you have a set instance where you can point to and say, this is where they wronged me. I'm not the problem. They're the problem. And I think for me, it was really hard at the beginning of that breakup to understand that, I had a bit of an ego crisis where I was like, oh my gosh, like they obviously just didn't want to be with me, like if they wanted to get married and have kids, they would have, picked me, and they didn't. So I struggled with that a little bit, that, feeling like I might have been the problem, but really at the end of the day, it just comes down to compatibility. And especially when somebody isn't an awful person, isn't a toxic asshole, you're like, oh, I don't have anything to point to make you the problem. But there doesn't need to be a problem in a relationship. There doesn't need to be the bad guy or the good guy, just two people that didn't fit together.
Yeah, I think that's very important for people to remember. And I think another interesting thing I think people would want to hear about is, how did it feel? Like, what were the differences in feeling between the abusive relationship and then the relationship that was healthy but just not compatible? What were the feelings that you experienced in the abusive relationship that you didn't in the next one?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think in the abusive relationship, I never felt at peace or like I could be myself. I always felt like I had to dress a certain way, listen to certain kind of music, and I felt like I was almost stifling a part of myself. Like my friends and family always said, like, you're so much brighter now that you're out of that relationship. I can see like your soul again. I can see those little things that make you quirky, because I just wanted to be like the cool, sexy girlfriend and not like the quirky, clumsy me that I really am. And I really am the opposite of cool and sexy. You know what I mean? Like that's not my
Don't sell yourself short.
brand. Maybe one day, but it's not my brand right now. But I was like, okay, I just have to be like perfect essentially for him, because if I mess up, he's gonna punish me for it. So there was always that fear in the back of my head that I was going to be punished for saying the wrong thing, and just so much hot and coldness. But with this guy, the consistency is so sexy. That to me is like the most incredible thing that somebody can provide in a relationship, is just day in and day out showing you the same kind of love, regardless of, if you were snappy towards them, or if, you're not wearing something that they like, heaven forbid. But like the freedom was there to just be myself and, be nerdy and explore parts of me that maybe other people wouldn't enjoy. But it really was like a sense of peace that I felt that I didn't feel in a toxic relationship. And I'm trying to think of other things too, but I think it was a lot of laughter and a lot of joy too, and just waking up knowing that like I was going to get a consistent version of that person. And that kind of peace is exactly what I needed. Like it completely reset my nervous system. I was like, oh wow, like I don't have to be in fight or flight all the time.
Consistency. Consistency is key. Do you believe in soulmates?
Ooh, that is such a good question. Hard hitting. Um, I don't think that there's one specific soulmate. I do think that there are, like, I would say that my best friend is my soulmate. Because she's been with me through everything. I couldn't see my life without her. But in terms of like romantic soulmates, I think that, wow, this is such a hard question. You really stumped me with this. I don't think that there's one soulmate. No, I think if there's two people that love each other, that connect with each other, that, want to build a life with each other and they work at it, that to me is the definition of a soulmate. Because I don't think that you can go into a relationship and not put in the work and just assume that whatever soul ties you have are going to keep you together. I really think that relationships and love are efforts, right? Like you have to actively choose it every single day. And who knows, maybe if that person is your soulmate, it's a lot easier for you to actively choose it. But I think that all in all, there's not one soulmate for everybody, but I do think that your soulmate is somebody that puts in the effort to be there. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. What you were saying before reminds me of one of my favorite definitions of a soulmate. And what you just said also, I think it's true that there's many people you can have a great connection with. I don't think there's just one. But
Mhm.
my favorite definition of a soulmate is from 6 Feet Under. And they said it's the
Love-
so maybe you know what I'm about to say. Do you?
I don't think so.
So there is a woman rabbi, I think, that told Nate, because Nate asked her, "Oh, do you believe in soulmates?" And she said, "Well, a soulmate to me is the person that helps you to become the most you can be and helps you to grow the most as a person while keeping in mind not all growth is comfortable." And I said, "Yeah, if I were to believe in a soulmate, that's what I would believe." And the key word there was helping you to become the most you can be,
Right.
not the one that's you feel like you need to wear a mask or pretend to be someone you're not to be around. That would be the red flag to me.
I remember that quote now, and I completely agree with you. It's like if you have to perform to be around that person, they're more than likely not the right person for you, right? Because it should be effortless in a way, the way that you behave in the relationship. Of course, there's effort, but if you have to, every day put on that mask of who they want you to be, probably not the right relationship for you.
Now, why do people put on that mask, you think? Because I think that's an important part to go over too. Why do they do it?
It's such a good question. I think a lot of the times it's hard to be vulnerable and it's hard to show people sides that you're not exactly ready to show for whatever reason that might be. And I think sometimes it's a lot easier to just be that perfect version of yourself or to cosplay what you think that they want. And it also helps you avoid a lot of difficult conversations. So I think if you're somebody who's not ready to have those hard conversations, or you're not at the point yet where you are aware of all these pieces of you, it's just easier. And it also stops you from heartbreak. And I think it's almost a survival technique, right? It's if you open up to this person, if you become vulnerable, if you don't have a mask on, that means that there's all these vulnerabilities that they could essentially use against you in the future. And that's only if you're with somebody who's, toxic or manipulative. But I think it's a survival tactic of, you know, making sure that all your deepest, darkest secrets aren't out there for the world to see.
And in this relationship with him,
Mhm.
how long did it take for there to start being a devaluing phase? Because was there a love bombing in the beginning?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It was as love bomby as it gets. It was probably for the first 4 or 5 months. And from what I've heard, that's typically how long it takes for them to start like having that mask slip. It's within like 3 to 6 months. So yeah, the love bombing was really intense. I've never met anybody like you telling me I love you within the first couple weeks of us dating. And it feels good, right? Like it feels really good to be wanted like that from somebody, especially I grew up like loving romantic comedies and Disney movies and just like wanting to having this idea of a relationship that was like if somebody isn't head over heels obsessed with you, then they probably don't like you, right? And that's what this past relationship has also taught me is that love can be comfortable and consistent without being ridiculously intense and chaotic. And I would much rather something that's on the boring side almost than something that like wrecks my nervous system.
Mm. And I think you've made a video about that too, to not confuse intensity with love.
Exactly, because that's exactly what we think, like what the media shows us, what we have this idea of love to be. So when somebody starts mimicking that, we don't necessarily think, oh, like maybe this isn't genuine. We want to take things at face value. So that's something that I have to always remind myself too, is that just because something's intense doesn't mean that it's good for you, and it doesn't mean that it's a genuine connection.
Right. And I think those rom-coms in Disney, they're really poison in a way. I think especially for kids that are growing up on that, because ultimately the message of a lot of them is you find a partner and you fall in love and then happily ever after.
Yeah.
But that's in the real world, the falling in love is just that'd be the first 5 minutes of the movie. And then after is really the work. Then it's okay, how do you keep this thing together? What's going on here? But they skip all of that part and they just get you to no, fall in love, the end. And Disney
Exactly.
movies like that, rom-coms, I just don't think it serves people. I don't think it really helps them.
I don't think so too. And I'm like thinking like, when I have kids one day, am I going to let them watch Disney movies? Like, is this going to be good for kids to digest? Because I mean, having a mom like me, I'm always going to be, throwing therapy talk at them, and I'm sure they'll get their fix of their fix of the real world. But it does make me think like how warped our idea of love is sometimes, and how when we do maybe find a nice guy, we're like, oh, he's too nice and he's boring, and I want somebody who fawns over me and makes me feel like I'm on top of the world all the time. But the thing about being on top of a pedestal is you can only be on top of there for so long.
Right. I think it would actually be a good opportunity if you have kids one day, you watch a Disney movie and then you go over it. And so, what do you think about that? And it gives you an opportunity to talk about that very thing if that's the message they got from it. Like, oh, okay, I can see where you would want this, but how about just know that's not real life. Real life is you get to that end point, and that's really just the beginning. And there's more stuff going on from there.
That's such a good point, because you can't shield them from everything that might be, toxic for their little brains. What you can do is train them to be like critical of those things, right? And to ask questions, because I think a lot of us just take things with face value, like even with the news, right? Like we're not really trained to go deeper into what they're telling us and to find the root truth of everything, not to get political or whatever. But I think
The
a lot
root
of the
truth.
times we don't get critical of what's being fed to us, and everything that's being fed to us has some sort of message. So either we become prey to it, or we learn from it, and we figure out what makes the or what truth pertains to us.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think it's important to recognize, okay, is this person who's telling me this message, do they have my best interest in mind? Why are they, or even that goes for our own thoughts too, thoughts that we have. It's, okay, why do I think this? How did I get here? And did that person have my best interest in mind? Just some good questions to ask yourself.
Oh yeah, I love thinking about thinking. It's my favorite thing. I'm the biggest overthinker.
There
But
you go.
it's also like reminding yourself that just because you have a thought doesn't mean that you have to give a ton of weight to it too. Like I have so many thoughts in my head that I just need to like acknowledge that they're there, and then kind of just wash them away. Because if we're putting a ton of credence and value on every single thought that we have, we're going to spend all day overthinking. So I think it's important to acknowledge that you are having thoughts, but not every thought deserves equal value.
That's a great point to remember. And back to your abusive relationship, to kind of circle that in with that,
Mhm.
when you were there, what kinds of things were you telling yourself to maybe rationalize his behavior or to stick around? What was going through your head at the time?
Yeah, there was a lot. It's one of them being they're not always like this. There
Mm,
are good moments, and at the beginning, the bad moments are maybe 5%, 10% of the time. And then I think as you keep going through the cycle, it unfortunately gets more and more frequent and more percentage of the time, because I think the more that you allow certain behaviors to go on, and I'm not saying allow in a way that you're welcoming the behavior, but instead of taking yourself out of the situation or seeing it for what it is, the longer that it goes on, the more intense it gets, and the harder it is to pull yourself out of it, I think. So that was one of the justifications I kept making, or rationalizations, is that they're not always like this, and I'm basing the relationship at that point on their potential and not their patterns. And that's what I try to tell people is pay attention to the patterns, because if something is happening time and time and time again, it's not a mistake. And
mm.
the more that we allow it to go on, the more that we're essentially telling them this is okay.
And I think that's important for people to know too, because not that it's your fault, but just to get people to realize if they're thinking the same things
Yeah.
about their current partner. Okay, this might be a problem. And I guess the next question is, what were you thinking that way in regards to what behavior of his? Oh, he's not always like what? What was he doing?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I mean, I think one thing that I would always let slide is like the name calling. So I would be called like the worst names, bitch, the C word, which I don't even like saying that word. I feel like it just cuts through the air. You can
Yeah.
say it if you want, but I just I don't like saying that word. Um, and that was something that I was just like, oh, it's he had a really bad childhood. He had been through a lot, and maybe he heard his, dad say that to his mom, and that's just something that he says, when he's upset and he doesn't know how to love. But I see his heart, and um, I feel like I was letting his past excuse how he was treating me in the present, and almost justifying it, saying that all relationships take work, and that also confuses emotional labor with emotional abuse. Um, so that was another one that I would constantly say is like, oh no, relationships take work. I'm never going to find somebody who's perfect. So maybe I'll just stick this one out because, he is nice to me sometimes and he brings me flowers and chocolates when he messes up. And I mean, the mess ups were pretty big. It was getting choked and, you know, the, all of the, what you think of when you think of domestic violence. I don't love to get into like the nitty gritty of it because I feel like I don't know if it necessarily matters to people to hear exactly what I went through. But I think for some people, they need to hear it to kind of validate their own experience. And for others, it could be very triggering to hear. But I will say that, there was choking, there was slapping, there was name calling, there was, things that weren't necessarily physical, but that felt very close to it, like not letting me leave the room, backing me into a corner. Um, and sometimes I would gaslight myself into thinking that I deserved it, and that, maybe had I been a little bit nicer, or maybe if I just listened to him, I wouldn't have gotten this sort of treatment, like I internalized their gaslighting as truth and just really ignoring the emotional whiplash of it all.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the big indicators of being in a trauma bond is when you start talking that way about yourself. And what you were doing is deering. I'm not sure if you've heard that term, but
Yeah.
defend, excuse, explain, rationalize. If someone does that, that's a warning sign. And I think the benefit of actually going into the bad behaviors they were doing is there are people who truly don't see it. They don't recognize it as, okay, he beat me up,
Mhm.
but he still loves me, or they say something along those lines,
Mhm.
and they really don't get it. Like they don't truly accept how bad it was. And to me, that's one of the big things I see people struggle with.
Right.
Just accepting, yeah, this person's abusive. And this person, no matter what you do, they're not going to collaborate. They're not going to problem solve. They're not going to try to understand you. If
Mm-mm.
anything, it's going to be the opposite.
That's exactly it. And it's it's a very confusing situation to be in because they don't just start out the gate, you know, with a level 10, very glaring example of physical abuse. It always starts small, and it, brings us to that frog in the boiling water analogy, where of course if you throw a frog into a pot of hot water, they're going to jump right out. But if you put them into a pot of cold water and you slowly turn up the heat, they're not going to jump out until the very possible last second, until they finally realize what's going on. It's a very slow buildup, and by the time you realize what's going on, you're in very deep, and that is the system. It is literally designed to keep you gasping for air, essentially.
Right. And that's the system of coercive control is really what that is. And I think it's also important to clarify the difference between playful flirting and roasting, which might include some name calling occasionally, versus the bad vibe version of name calling, the serious version of it. I think some people, I'm sure if you ask an abusive person, they might try to say they, oh, are just teasing or flirting or something. But no, the energy won't lie about that kind of thing. It's going to feel much different.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I always say you have to trust your gut. It's very hard to do, especially when you're in a situation where you're kind of groomed to go against your gut and taught that your gut doesn't really matter because, if you say something, they'll say, well, that didn't happen, or they rewrite reality or whatever it is. But like I think our gut is always or almost always right. And if something is screaming at you, there's probably a reason behind it. So I think that confusion that we feel in these kinds of relationships and always wondering where we stand, that's our gut screaming at us to say, okay, like take a closer look at this because your confusion isn't unfounded. There is a root to it and there is a reason why you're feeling like that.
Right. And I think that's the toughest part. When someone's in a trauma bond, in an abusive relationship, they don't trust their gut anymore
Yeah.
because the abusive person is able to gaslight them into not trusting their gut. And they think, oh, I must be wrong. And they'll start doing the rationalizations that you said you did. And it's a circular, a very bad process that just keeps on getting worse and worse. It compounds. But I call it unsubscribing. Got to unsubscribe from that distorted version of reality.
I love that. And I think it's like think about the version of yourself that you were before you came into this relationship. Would they have accepted what you're going through right now? And then I also ask, if your mom, if your best friend, if your sister, brother was in this situation, what would you tell them to do? And why aren't you taking your own advice? And why do you think that you're too strong or you're too insert adjective here to handle it and they aren't? So it's like that's why it's so important to take a step back in these kind of things. And if you are noticing that confusion, just like try to detach emotionally a little bit because the emotions and the justifications is what keeps us so far in it.
Right. And that's a huge thing there with that too, is just getting through to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing you were talking about me yesterday, where does radical acceptance come into play with this?
Oh my gosh, I love radical acceptance, and I'm glad you brought it up because I think it's a term that gets misunderstood all the time, and it's not the same as approval, right? It's not forgiveness. It's not just being the bigger person. It's definitely not the spiritual bypassing where you float above the pain and you say, oh, this is just who they are and I have compassion for it. No, not at all. I think radical acceptance is that like mental reset button that you hit when your nervous system is stuck in a loop, when you're trying to fix them, when you're trying to justify them. And it's the moment that you say to yourself, I don't have to like this, but I do have to stop denying it. This is what's happening. This is how they're treating me. This is what I'm in. Because when you're in a trauma bond like that, your brain is constantly looking for relief through illusion. That's what I call it. And you're zooming in on those good moments. You're twisting their backstory into a reason for the behavior, and you're finding meaning in the mistreatment. And that's what we do to survive. And I get that. We narrate our pain so it feels less chaotic. We'll tell ourselves stories like those rationalizations. He's like this because of his trauma, or she doesn't mean it. She's just scared of losing me. Or they love me, they just don't know how to show it. That to me is not radical acceptance. That is like emotional rationalization. And that's staying in something harmful while you try to frame it into something that it's not. And what I think rational or radical acceptance is a conscious decision to stop spinning the story, stop putting a PR spin on it.
Mm.
And it's not cold, it's not disconnected. I think it's a very honest and present thing that you can do because what you're essentially doing is stepping back, like you're actually pulling your energy back from the situation and saying, let me look at this for what it is, not what I want it to be, not what I wish it could become, not who they are when things are good, but what is actually happening right now. And that's radical acceptance. It's not saying this is okay, it's just saying this is. And I think you get two very powerful things once you start doing that. One, you get clarity, like real clarity, the kind that's very impossible to access when you're still bargaining, rationalizing, hoping that they'll change. Because when you stop editing the story, you start seeing the truth and not the version that you've been trying to emotionally manage. And then I think the other thing it does, it creates distance, not physically at first, but psychologically, mentally. You stop participating in the emotional chaos, you stop reacting and you start observing. And that starts weakening that trauma bond because when you stop responding to the highs and lows and instead you go, this is a pattern and I see it now. That's like the definition to me of getting your power back. And that's why I think radical acceptance is like the precursor to emotional detachment. And obviously, I think the precursor to leaving the relationship too is you can't detach if you're still hoping. You can't gray rock if you're still emotionally invested in their potential. So radical acceptance gives you this neutrality, and it puts you in the observer seat, and it lets you say, this is worse than I thought, or this is not going to change. So I think you're in something right now where your mind feels so tangled, your heart feels so confused. Start there, not with a big decision, not with a breakup, but just with saying, this is what it is.
Right. And I think the concept you just talked about previously, that ties in with radical acceptance, because
Yeah.
if you could say, well, to treat yourself the way you would someone you really cared about, and say if the same thing was happening to your best friend
Yeah.
or your sister, what would you say to them in that situation? How would you label their behavior if it was happening to them? And I think that could really help with radical acceptance for people.
100%. I completely agree with that. It's like, when you're so deep into a situation, like you're saying, it's so hard to see it for what it is. But when you step out of it, that's why people like look back at their relationship and they're like, oh my God, like, why did I not see this? Or why did I not notice the red flag sooner? You couldn't. You were so deep into it and you still love this person and you wanted to believe that things were going to get better. And I think that's why the brain is such a beautiful but such a tricky thing, because our brain doesn't want us to suffer. So our brain will make rationalizations to help us survive. But it also can keep us in states of manipulation and states of abuse. So that's why I love radical acceptance. And I don't think it gets talked about a lot, because I think there's a lot of like miscommunication, misconception around it, and people maybe thinking that it's just like, oh yeah, you're gonna accept the behavior. Yeah, I think maybe radical acceptance isn't the best word for it. It's like radical, I don't know. I'll noodle on that one.
I think radical acceptance does not mean tolerating. Does not
Correct.
mean tolerating of disrespect or poor treatment. Radical acceptance to me would mean just fully acknowledging it is what it is. That
Yes.
doesn't mean you need to continue tolerating it and being involved with it, but it first comes down to acknowledging what exactly is going on. And I think that's where radical acceptance would help someone.
Yes, and it's the first step to many steps.
Oh
So I
yeah.
think if whenever somebody is in something very deeply abusive, I always tell them, okay, like let's try to get to a point where you see it for what it is and not for what you want it to be.
Right. And now you coach people now too. What do you hear people struggling with the most? What do you hear people getting caught up on?
That is such a great question. I think a lot of the times it's why did this happen to me? Why me? Why somebody who gave them everything, who was such a great partner to them? And I think that's a really vicious cycle to be stuck in sometimes, because it puts the onus on us and not necessarily on their actions. And it can keep the victim in this cycle where they're having to continue to explain themselves and to continue to explain why they left, when in reality, regardless of how perfect you were, regardless of, how much of a better partner or wife, whatever you could have been to this person, they were going to treat you the exact same way. It's literally like rinse and repeat. Whoever the supply was at the time is who's going to get that side of them. And I think that's something that I hear a lot. I think another thing that I hear a lot is, can they change? Um, and from what I've seen, it's a difficult question to answer, because you never want to say no. Nobody can change. They're never going to change. 0% chance that this person is going to get better. But I think for somebody like a narcissist specifically to want to get help, it takes a lot of self awareness and it takes a lot of accountability to even get to that point where they want to change. And unfortunately, like, that's the hallmark of the personality disorder, is that lack of accountability and that lack of self awareness. And, maybe they're aware of how they're hurting people, but they don't really care to change it because it really benefits them. So being in a relationship like with somebody like that, they don't love you for who you are. They love you for what you can do for them. So when people ask me, can they change? I say, yeah, not really. Because it takes that level of accountability that they don't really possess in the first place.
Right.
So it's kind of freeing to hear that, to know that no, there's not a lot of change that can happen there. Because then you kind of take the shame off of you not being enough, and it's really just their own thing, and that's how they're going to operate through life.
And I think regardless of what they say, what the toxic or narcissistic person says, you got to trust their actions. Their actions are going to speak the loudest of all. They might say all sorts of things. Some may even say they're sorry, or they'll do anything to try to get you back in a Hoover,
Oh,
but the actions will speak the loudest. And I think it's also important to remember that there are different levels of severity,
of
and there's
course.
different types of narcissists too. But regardless of that, if someone can never admit when they're wrong, they could never admit there's even an issue, I would be very hesitant to believe there was ever any change. And
Yeah.
I think also what you reminded me of too is people look at relationships that their ex get into, and from the outside,
Oh, yeah.
they can appear fine. From the outside on social media, oh, he's been with this person or she's been with this person for years. Does that mean that they're treating their new partner better than they treated me? And to which I would say to them, you have no idea what's really going on behind closed doors there. Because when both people are in it, the person who's being mistreated, they don't want people to think they're being mistreated a lot of times. They don't want people to think that until they're out. But when they're in it, most of the time they're going to defend them and they're going to act like they're in the happiest relationship. And usually those are the relationships that are covering up for something. The ones that are like every other day, oh, I love my partner so much. I was like, are you sure? Is there something going on?
Right. Because it's like, if you are so happy, you don't need to scream about it. And you don't need to make a performance of it. And I think that's something that I hear a lot too, is like watching them, a narcissist move on or their ex move on. They do it quickly, they do it loudly, and they look so happy, but they'll say, oh, they seem so happy with this new person. And that's the key word, is seem, because what's actually happening beneath the surface is that it's a rerun. They don't build new relationships, they recycle that performance. It's the same love bombing, same over the top charm, same like fast track of connection. And if they seem like they're suddenly healed, it's because that new supply hasn't seen the full script yet. And it's a lot about image management, because I think with a narcissist specifically, it's not just about ego, it's about a lot of like fragility and like deep insecurity that's underneath that ego. And they tend to build their identity around being right, around being admired, around being in control, and confronting their flaws feels like an annihilation of who they are. So most narcissists don't change, they just adapt to a new situation. They just shape shift, say what you want to hear, throw you little crumbs to buy time. And I think that's where so many people get caught, because that change might look real, but the patterns are going to repeat, and they might get better at hiding it, but they usually don't get better at actually healing it.
And I think a good one to remember is their hypersensitivity to criticism and perceived criticism. That causes a lot of the chaos. That if they feel they've been attacked, because they perceive disagreements as attacks a lot of times, or being corrected as an attack, then see how they act in those moments. That's going to be very telling.
Oh yeah, that is core narcissistic behavior, and it's not random. It is very short, it's unpredictable, and I think what most people don't get is that narcissists aren't very confident, right? They crave praise because they have that very fragile sense of self underneath, but their entire identity is held together by how they're perceived and not who they actually are. So when you do offer feedback like that, constructive even, it feels like a personal attack, because to them, it doesn't mean I want to work on this with you. It means I see who you are behind this mask. And then the defense mechanisms kick in, the deflection, you're overreacting, the projection, you're the one with the issue, the rage, the withdrawal. And what starts as, you wanting to get clarity or you wanting to tell them how their actions hurt you, it turns into a storm. And that's the trap, because I feel like I don't want to say normal, but people who aren't narcissistic want connection, but people like that who are abusive, who are manipulative, really just want compliance.
That's a big one. Do you know Dr. George Simon?
I do, yes.
So he was telling me that the story of narcissists, right? He falls in love with his image. And when someone conflicts that, they have this image that they want admired, that they want praised. And if someone does the opposite, criticizes or
Mhm.
corrects them, they really don't like that discongruency. I'm not even sure if that's a word, or incongruency. That's the word. So they really get upset about that. And I think that's one of the biggest things, just telling them no, seeing how they act when they don't get their way, or how they treat people that can do nothing for them.
Mhm.
Those are usually the clues of something that's going on.
Oh, it's a huge red flag. If you try to set a boundary with somebody, or if you try to say no to somebody and they blow up out of it, like that is a massive red flag. And to them, like there's no such thing as boundaries. Boundaries equal betrayal. Boundaries equal defiance. And I think if you're in a relationship with somebody like that, it's really important to like peel back the curtain a little bit and think and ask yourself, like, why are they having such a visceral reaction to somebody, that to something that seems so normal to me, and talking about my feelings and talking about, wanting to find some sort of common ground. And I think there's a lot of emotional conditioning that happens in a relationship like that, so it's important to have boundaries from the beginning. And it's hard to do that for sure, but I think it's practice makes perfect, and the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Mm. And you reminded me, there's a lot of people who are saying the narcissist in my life, they tried to weaponize their boundaries and they're trying to withhold my kids or do something. And I said, that's not really a boundary then. That's
Mhm.
more of a punishment. If they're doing something to hurt you, that's not a boundary.
Oh
If,
yeah,
if that's their intention, it's to punish, manipulate, or to control you. That's not the same as a boundary.
I agree. Boundaries to me are about like safety, honesty, and like mutual respect. But I agree, narcissists don't really use boundaries for those reasons. They use them for control, right? And they weaponize that healing language, like therapy talk, self help phrases. And my ex used to say to me, like, I need to protect my energy, so I'm going to block you. Or I'm setting a boundary right now, so you're not allowed to question me, which is like, okay, I don't think that's the point of setting a boundary. And if it's one-sided like that, like that's not a boundary. That's like emotional dominance or
That's
whatever.
slick. That's slippery. Because
Yeah.
a lot of people, they comment in the comment sections, but the narcissist in my life did this, they did that, they weaponized this boundary. No, that's not what a boundary is supposed to be. Boundary
Yes.
says something to protect themselves. If they're doing it to hurt you, now that's control. Now that's a punishment, similar to a silent treatment or alienating kids from someone. That's punishing. That's not the same.
Completely agree. I think a true boundary is it's clearly communicated. It's respectful on both sides. It's open to discussion where trust exists, and I think it's rooted in like personal responsibility, not punishment. Whereas a weaponized boundary is super rigid. It's a shutdown tactic. It's delivered with some sort of like superiority or emotional withdrawal, and I think it's often framed as self-care, but it's about control and weaponizing weaponizing against them.
Right. Now, my next question for you, this is going to be a trickier one,
Okay.
but it's about confusion.
Uh-huh.
What do you think the confusion is for people that don't understand narcissism? And what do you think the confusion is for the people who have been victims of narcissists? What do you think they need clearing up? And what do you think the people that don't understand it at all, what do they need clearing up?
That's such a great question. I think to people who are watching from the outside, friends, family, even therapists, who will tell you, why don't you just leave? Or are you sure it's abuse? Or have you tried talking to them about how you feel? um, if you're confused by somebody who keeps going back to a relationship that seems obviously toxic from the outside, just know that it's not weakness, it's not drama, because narcissistic abuse doesn't often start with chaos. It starts with charm, it starts with intensity, with somebody who mirrors everything that you ever wanted and reflects it back to you like it's a dream. And very, very, very slowly, over months, the dream starts to turn. At least for me. It might be quicker for some people, slower for others, but you start getting blamed for things that you didn't do. You start explaining yourself constantly. You start doubting your own tone, your memory, your reactions, told that you're too emotional, you're too cold, too selfish, too this, too that. And every fight becomes your fault. Every boundary becomes a betrayal. And every time you try to leave, they'll change just enough to pull you back in. And they will say just the right thing to make you feel like, okay, maybe there is some hope here. But it's so covert, and it's a system that's designed to keep the other person confused. So when people ask, why don't you just leave? I want you to know that in their head, they tried leaving 1,000 times, but that cycle of gaslighting, of guilt, fear kept pulling them back in. So it's not about logic at the end of the day, it was about survival. So if you love somebody that's in a relationship like this, don't shame them. Don't rush them. Don't say, I told you so when it ends. Be there for them. Tell them that I believe you. I see what's happening right now, and I'm here for you for whenever you do want to talk about it. Because I think that one safe voice in their head cuts through the confusion. So I think that's what I would say to somebody who is confused about why you would stay in a narcissistic relationship.
Okay. And I think the thing that would be poison for someone who's in a trauma bond are some of the things that would be more appropriate to say if someone's going through a rough patch in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And really recognizing the difference between a rough patch
Right.
versus abuse, disrespect, etc. And if you try to apply the lessons that you would in a quote unquote rough patch, maybe there's a health consequence or financial hardship or something. And if you try to apply that lesson to a trauma bond, that's going to be poison because you don't need that lesson. That's the wrong lesson to be pulling. And really the lesson is radical acceptance. That's the lesson to be pulling. Like truly acknowledging what's going on. That's the appropriate thing to be taking from it.
Oh, 100%. And I think for the ones that are in the abusive relationship, like, you're not crazy. You're not dramatic. You're not weak. You're in something that's designed to confuse you. And I think narcissistic abuse or any sort of emotional, physical abuse doesn't always show up as screaming. They'll say, I love you with one hand, and they'll, hurt you with the other. And it rewrites your memory. It makes you apologize for being hurt, and it makes you question your worth. And I think if you feel like you have to shrink to be loved, that was a big one for me. If you're constantly stuck between I want to leave or maybe I'm the problem, you're not alone. It's probably some sort of trauma bond or something that's actually deeply hurting you, and you don't need another apology. You don't need to find the perfect words that finally make them get how you're feeling. You're living it, and you're going to survive it. You don't need permission to want peace, and you don't need it to hit that rock bottom for you to get that approval to walk away. And I think if there's a voice inside of you that's whispering that this isn't love, that's you, and that's your clarity trying to pull you back home.
I think another good thing that you said was just if you notice yourself pretending, if you're pretending to be someone that you don't think you are to please this person, that's a big one to pay attention to. And I think that's something that if you really get quiet for a second and get grounded, people would notice maybe, okay, I am trying to put on this mask to please this person. And it also might be just to not be abused too, right? That's also part of it as well. So I don't want to say people are only doing it to please them. It's like, no, it's to avoid abuse. It's to avoid disrespect too. But just the fact that you're doing it for either reason is the problem.
Exactly. That's very, very well said. And it's a confusing space to be in. And I don't expect anybody to understand it if they haven't been in it. But I think there should be a little bit less of a, why are you still in this? And more of a, why are they doing this? Or, why are they like this? And there's so much of a focus on the victim and why they didn't walk away, and less of a focus on what are the patterns that this person is showing them that could have been, could have hopefully been avoided one day. And that's kind of why I started my channel too, is like these little little patterns that we start seeing end up being the big red flags that we look back on. We say, had I been able to spot this in the beginning, maybe I wouldn't have gone further down the line with this person. And it's, people will say, oh, it's petty, you're overthinking, or you're looking too much into the fine details. But like, I'm not overthinking, I'm just thinking.
Right, right. And I think to the people who don't understand the relationships, period,
Yeah.
for them to truly know, like, okay, this person, like everything they're going to do, it's going to be about power, control, managing their image, narcissistic supply, and avoiding accountability. And truly, though, that is everything that they're going to do is going to be fitting into that. And I think that's what people don't understand. They don't truly understand how petty and how ridiculous and how childish they can go. And when they don't understand that, then they're going to be saying advice that's just not as helpful. And I think I would also tell them, hey, when that person's been love bombed in the beginning, and there's really a great feeling, especially if they hit those right buttons. Yeah, that's a great feeling. People are going to want to return to that a lot of times. That good feeling, people might want to chase that. And I think that's another good thing for the people on the outside to know too.
100%. And you're human, you know, at the end of the day, like if you're getting mad at yourself for wanting to give somebody a chance and wanting to be empathetic, like I don't want anybody to lose that part of themselves. I just want you to stop giving it to the people that don't deserve it.
Right. And that was the thing. When I was listening to your podcast the other day with Bitch is a Bad Word podcast, people should check that out. I'll be making a guest appearance on there as well. But you had said that your parents actually were able to see through your ex's behavior. And I thought that was pretty good that they had your back about that. And they knew when you were going to call them because they knew things were going off the rails. Mm-hmm. It was important that you had people in your corner there, not the people that are going to be the opposite. That some people's families defend the abuser and they become flying monkeys for them almost. But thankfully for you, that wasn't your story.
And thank goodness for that. I mean, it had been years of abuse up until that point, and they saw it, you know, 4 or 5 years later into the relationship. But once they saw it, it's like you can't unsee that kind of thing, especially when it's your child, it's your baby girl. And having them in my corner made this process so much easier for me. I wouldn't say it was easy, but it took a whole lot of burden off of me, because I felt like at the end of the day, like I'm going to be loved by my family, and I don't need whatever version of love this person is trying to give me, because it's not like comparing it to like how my parents treat me, like, and how I want my partner to treat me. And that's what I ask myself all the time, like, especially as I'm like starting to date now, it's, does this behavior align with who I see as my partner in the future? And if it's not a fuck yes, it's a hell no.
Oh, you say that too. It's one of my favorite sayings.
I love it. I love it. And I'm like, it's so true, right? Like, especially with somebody that you're going to have as like your other half, or, you know, whatever you want to call them, your life partner. But like, it's those little questions that really save you from getting into the wrong relationships, or, you know, not making the right decisions. So I'm all about the hell yeses, fuck yeses, yeah. I should say.
Well, I said, it's not a hell yeah, it's a fuck no.
There you go. There you go.
But I think also, because it is more clear when you put it through that lens. Like once you see and feel what a good relationship is like, or just a good connection. It doesn't even have to be a relationship that works long term, but just a good connection versus one that's on unstable ground, or you're not quite sure about, or there's abuse. That's going to be night and day. Like there is you can't even compare the two, because it's just so much different.
Exactly. And it's like, having that as a comparison, it really builds a foundation for your next relationships. Like you are never going to let yourself slip back into accepting that kind of behavior. And yeah, there's so much hope, and there's more people out there that are good and not abusive than the other way around. And I genuinely believe that. And I think sometimes we feel ourselves attracted to people, or have this magnetic pull to people who might not be good for us. But I think once you've had a taste of the other side, it's so much easier for you to tell kind of right away. okay, this is not going to work for me, and this is not going to be good.
Right. I mean, and some of that could be the limerence or the twin flames or fill in the blank with whatever people say. And I think some of it's just a maturity thing too. As people get older, they get a little wiser, hopefully, and they learn from their mistakes and they learn from just life. And they don't make the same mistakes they did when they were younger.
100%. I'm glad you brought up the limerence, because that's something that I've been thinking a lot about too, like kind of that intensive, obsessive, emotional attachment to somebody. And I think you have to interrupt that fantasy sometimes and remind yourself what is and what am I wanting this to be. And once you get to that point where you're not romanticizing everything and you're not just seeing the potential of everything, the obsession gets quieter and that fog lifts, and you realize that it wasn't about them at all. It was kind of, you were searching for rescue in somebody that was emotionally available. And you have to start meeting the parts of yourself that were neglected before they showed up.
I think another important question to ask ourselves is, do we like who we're becoming with this person? Do we like the kind of person that we are when we're with this person? I think that's a very powerful question to ask too.
I completely agree. It's like, is the version of myself that is in this relationship the version that I want to be in the future? Because being in a relationship that's toxic and abusive like that, it really does change you into somebody else. You almost start mirroring that person because they've made you feel like the biggest piece of shit for so long that you're like, oh wait, maybe I am. And you kind of start internalizing it sometimes. And I think that's where that idea of reactive abuse comes to. And people are like, oh, I must be the abuser because, I said something to them in retaliation or I pushed them. And I think it's very different. Of course, everybody should be held accountable for however they react in certain situations. But I think that it's not equal footing at all.
I was listening to a couple people talk today about reactive abuse.
Yeah.
Dr. Cochiella, she calls it self-defense. And then Mark Vicente, he just made a reel today about it. And he had said, I hate that term because he said, why shouldn't it be called a reaction to abuse as opposed to reactive? The way they phrase it, I don't know how they came up with the phrase that way, like reactive abuse. But I guess they're trying to make it so that the person who is doing the abuse, they're trying to say their behavior, I guess. But it is the reaction to abuse is what they're talking about.
Absolutely. I think that term doesn't take into account all of the nuance and the context around it, right? Because if somebody's poking and poking and poking and poking, pushing all of your buttons, cornering you, like, you're going to snap. You're going to, like, you're human, right? And it's your nervous system is responding by saying, listen, I've tried talking to you. I've tried, doing things in a calm way. And the only way that you're able to understand what I'm going through is when I explode at you. So it's like a survival technique that you start using. It's, the moment that your body says, enough, I'm not holding this in anymore. And it's damaging because now the abuser can use that against you, right? The moment that you scream, that, you rage, text them or whatever. And it's deeply manipulative and it can keep you stuck in shame. But I don't think that reactive abuse is a systematic type of abuse. It's a trauma response, right? It's your body crying out for help. And for anybody who's gone through that, like, you were pushed to a place that you were never supposed to be in. And that's not who you are. It's who you became in this presence of chronic danger.
And I would stress to those people, you're just human. It's a human response. If you're going to be gaslit and tortured, you might have an emotional reaction at some point, and that's just being human. And that's why I hate it when people say things like, no one can make you feel anything. Because I know a lot of abusers, they love that. Because, I can't make you feel anything. I noticed the people who are narcissistic, they love that because it absolves them. I can't make you feel anything. But it's like, no, people are human. I mean, if you get punched, are you going to bruise? Are you going to feel pain? So why is it so different with someone's words? Like, if you're in the spiritual realm, words are powerful. Words are absolutely powerful. How we talk to ourselves is powerful, just as if a physical action is powerful. So I've never bought that. It's always been a pet peeve of mine that no one can make you feel anything. It can be something to strive for, but it's not realistic per se. Like, Things are going to happen.
And it completely erases the idea of like the root cause. Like you're completely separate, you have to separate the reaction from the root and look at why this happened and not just how you did it, right? Because I think that's what they want you to feel. They want you to feel like you're the manipulator, that you're the narcissist. And yeah, I think we need to work on renaming that term and making it a little bit more palatable.
I would say so. Now, the last thing I want to ask you, masculine containment versus control. What would you say? What do you think about those two things?
Ooh, that's a really interesting, that's a really interesting question. I've been noodling on that one. I think it's something that gets misunderstood a lot in like this space, right? I would say that masculine containment is not control. And if you've experienced abuse, especially emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, it's easy to conflate the two because they can look very similar at first. Like with control, they'll say, don't wear that. Why didn't you text me back? Don't talk to him. I'm just protecting you. And really, it's all about the domination, the ownership, the fear. And it uses power to make you feel small so that you kind of shrink to keep the peace. And it makes you feel responsible for their emotions. Whereas masculine containment is, it's about emotional safety. It's that masculinity that makes you feel protected, present, grounded. They'll say like, I've got you. I'm not gonna try to fix you, but I'm not gonna let you fall alone. You're safe here. I think it makes room for your full expression without you having to shrink or silence yourself, and it doesn't restrict you, but it holds you. So I think that control is rooted in insecurity, whereas containment is rooted in self-regulation. So a controlling man is reactive, but a man who provides that masculine containment is regulated. He creates this calm space without silencing you. And he's holding space for you, like in a way that somebody who's controlling wouldn't, because they're just managing their own comfort and not necessarily yours. So I think there's that idea of peace, right? Control feels like pressure, but containment feels like peace.
And we could probably do a whole show just on that topic too. That part's super interesting to me. But any other closing thoughts you have for us here?
I just want to say that you're doing amazing work, Jared.
Thank you.
You're one of the OGs in the space, and I have a lot of respect for you and the way that you talk about the topics. And you say that you have, you're more blunt and aggressive, but I don't think so. I think that you bring honesty to the space, and I think you come from a perspective where there's no shame around it, and it's not a victim mentality, which I know it's easy to slip into that sometimes. And that's not to say that we're the problem, but I think you advocate for the ownership of your own life and your own actions, and giving people that strength to know that, hey, like I can actually change the course of this, and I can control how the rest of my life unfolds. So I just want to thank you for being a safe space and to talking to us like humans, and not like and not babying us. I appreciate that.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I think I try to stress it's not blaming to do that. I'm not saying it's anyone's fault that this has happened to them. I'm not excusing the abusive person's behavior. I just try to tell people, what can you do differently? Because that's all you have control over, is what can you do differently in the future. It's not your fault, but what can you learn? What can you do differently?
100%. If you get out of any relationship, good, bad, ugly, pretty, and you don't learn anything about yourself, that is a waste.
All right. And where can people find you?
All right. You can find me on TikTok, Beyond the Bruise, and then Instagram is beyond.the.bruise. And I also have a YouTube, Beyond the Bruise. I got to zhuzh that up a little bit. I got to make you guys some more long form content, but Instagram and TikTok are my bread and butters right now.
All right. We'll be looking forward to your new YouTube content too.
Thank you so much, Jared. It was a pleasure and an honor.
It was a pleasure having you on here as well. And thanks for the kind words too.
Thank you.